Hello, I am Jake Collins, and this is Knightmare Series 4, Episode 10, which was first broadcast on the 9th of November 1990. When I first watched Knightmare Series 4, Episode 1, and it was this opening, I thought, oh, they've done something to the music. I wasn't exactly sure what, and I didn't realise until I saw some of Series 1 to 3 on video again in March 1996, just how different the music was here. But I did miss the little creature in prison towards the end of the sequence there, which adds a lot to it, and it's not as good without it. Here is a good way to open an episode. Have Pickle update us on the team's progress from the Book of Quests. Have the little status bar along the bottom. Quest, time, clues, level, spells. Very useful. Gets you back into it nicely. Refreshes your memory. And unlike the dungeon ditties, it's not at all cringe. It does involve getting the advisors to sit there to film the episode openings, which they can only be bothered to do in Series 4 and 5. But I do think it's worth the trouble. It is the way I feel most happy with a Knightmare episode opening. Perhaps it's partly to do with my own experiences of recording them and getting to know them so well, but I do think it's a very useful way to start the episode. And it's presented very well. Now here we are with Vicky, Sarah, Susanna and Katrina at Dungarth, and we're going to see how you can't really die on level 1 in Series 4. Here's the ogre. Vicky's going to give him the necklace to distract him while she escapes into Dungarth. Pickle's quite surprised that this works. I think you may have done it, team. Well done. Of course, it would have been better, really. One has to conclude to have the stealth potion here to sneak past the ogre, and to have the necklace to pay Fatilla in the near future, to bribe Fatilla, to give him his gratuity, his tip on the way through to level 2. But it's okay. Whatever objects you take from Oakley, they can be made to work in Series 4. As we saw with Alistair earlier in the series, he didn't have the gold for Fatilla. Tregard was encouraging Alistair's team to fob Fatilla off with the key. It didn't actually happen there, but it is going to happen here with Vicky and Fatilla in a very wonderful scene. There's obviously a concentrated effort in this series not to get through quite so many teams. The slower pace of the quests, including the eye shield sequences, definitely helps with that. And the fact that, yeah, you really can't die in level 1. They're going to let you through to at least level 2, and 4 of the 8 teams in this series do actually end up getting all the way to level 3. Yeah, you can tell. It's working. They've managed to slash a third off the number of teams from the previous series, 12, down to, as I said, 8 here in this series. But this is a wonderful scene with Michael Kuehl as Fatilla. I was praising Michael Kuehl last time. Fatilla is a character who could come across as very ill-conceived, doing rather boring appearances where he takes bribes and lets the dungeoneer through and not a lot else happens. A nice bit of variation in this particular scene, of course, with the list. Vicky's got to tell him if her name's on the list of those who are allowed down the well. And the team quite correctly work out, yes, it is the right thing to say to him. And here we go, fobbing him off with the key, a very nice little exchange between Vicky and Michael Kuehl there. So yeah, thanks to Michael Kuehl's talents, even the most potentially boring Fatilla scene is fun and interesting and engaging. Absolutely excellent job he does with that role, as with all his other roles. Of course, one interesting thing about Fatilla in this series is that he does give us the kind of opening ideas for the opposition as a faction. He's the one who'll say he's been employed by himself, old Skullface himself, down in level 3, which is really the only indication we get that Mogdred might be some kind of leader of the opposition, and it's a role that very much gets developed fully for Lord Fear in the next series. I was thinking about that point about Mogdred. Both the oracles, one in Series 2 and one in Series 3, do say Dread Mog, who causes all disruption or confusion, which kind of gives the idea that, yeah, Mogdred is the big baddie in the dungeon. So it's a kind of hint at his role as leader of the opposition, such as it exists in those early series, which it doesn't really. But the concept really is coming to fruition here in Series 4, and if we're saying that Fatilla has been hired by Mogdred to stop the Dungeoneers, Mogdred's given him that list without any Dungeoneers' names on it really, then yeah, that is definitely Mogdred as the prototype for Lord Fear. And as I say, yes, that idea will very much get fully developed in the next series. Talking about Vicky and her objects there, of course it's absolutely right that they're able to get through to the end of the level, even though they didn't take the ideal 2 objects. They got 3 out of 3 with Oakley. But Oakley doesn't stick to the old wall monster rules. 1 truth will pass you, 2 may aid you, 3 commands me. He plays by his own rules. He just tells you whatever he's gonna tell you for 2 or 3 correct answers, which is, in Vicky's case, absolutely nothing. Which isn't very fair, really, is it? Treyarch and Pickle give each other this look like, oh, I thought this team were completely stupid, but they've answered all Oakley's questions correctly. Well, 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 after that score of 3. But it doesn't do them much good in the end, does it? However, it does make some nice scenes there. The ogre and the necklace, I've got some valuable things here. Fatilla and the key, it'll open any door. Lots of doors, will it? Great stuff. So really, I suppose, Vicky's objects all worked out for the best. Now here, Vicky's being picked up by Gundrada after that horrendously awkward scene, almost guiding Vicky into the pit and so on, which shows how this team aren't really capable of cool and competent guiding and advising under pressure. But Gundrada and Melly here, it is indicative of a criticism of Series 4. There's not a lot of actual quest for the team to do to get to grips with. It's all rather linear, coasting through. It's not really a challenge. And yeah, that's true. We had a bit of variety when Vicky landed in level 2. She didn't land on a table. She's the only Dungeoneer in Series 4, apart from Helen at the beginning, not to land on a table. And we've got a new room there with Gundrada in it. But now we just get this bit of coasting that goes nowhere. Leave Melly here in the stocks, or you can do without my help and my sword. And of course, they do the right thing. They abandon Gundrada and rescue Melisandre, because on a quest for truth, justice, chivalry, that's exactly the right thing to do. But they don't get anything out of it. They just carry on, secure in the knowledge that they've done the right thing and stayed true to the Knightmare challenge. It's kind of pointless, it's linear, it's just coasting through a sequence of events rather than actually doing a Knightmare quest. And I can see why fans of the first 3 series, watching this back in 1990, would have thought that and been disappointed by it. Now here we are with Merlin. This is the closest thing there is in this series to Merlin's room. He appears in this room 3 times. Motley also appears in here once, and Brother Mace appears in here once. And anyone who has enjoyed Merlin's series 1 to 3 appearances, like Paul McIntosh when he was writing about Merlin for the Eye Shield, remember him, may be rather disappointed with Merlin's efforts in this series, and indeed they are certainly odd. As Paul McIntosh says, gone are the flowing green magical robes, to be replaced by a horrible sackcloth robe, and some very strange appearances where Merlin's kind of in disguise and kind of tricking the teams into proving themselves to him. That is his MO in this series. He dresses up in the sackcloth robe, plays a little trick on the teams, and rewards them with magic for Ariadne, usually. If they pass his little test, Treguard says here, as for this guardian of the chamber of opposite extraction, I'm beginning to find his style of trickery somewhat familiar. Treguard is commenting on the fact there that Merlin's doing something weird and crazy to test the team once again. With Alistair and here with Vicky, his tests are more interesting than what he does with Helen, Nikki, and in a longer plot sequence with Giles and the bargain, which is to pretend to be a poor prisoner shut in the stocks and rescuing him, showing compassion and mercy, is how they prove their chivalry to Merlin. Of course, in Nikki's case, there's also a riddle to answer, isn't there, which they can't answer and thus get eaten by Ariadne, despite the fact that Karina did voice the correct answer during their discussion, which is more like Merlin's old MO, riddles for magic. And he's doing with Vicky here, riddles for magic, but there's a very particular, very famous and very hard twist on the whole thing. I like the trick Merlin was doing with Alistair earlier in the series, pretending to be the peddler and telling him various things about the 3 objects, so the team have to work out which one to buy, and with teamwork, good teamwork, because they don't all agree, Alistair's advisors, they come to the right conclusion. And by the boot that's possessed of the spell Run. And that's one example of what I was saying last time. I do think Alistair's team are the best game players in this series. The trick Merlin is playing on Vicky here is the hardest trick anyone probably ever plays on any team. You have to unravel the opposites. Merlin is talking in opposites in the Chamber of Opposite Extraction. So you have to answer his 3 riddles as the advisors try to come to terms with it, saying, do we have to answer the questions the right way round? Well, yes, it seems that you do actually have to give the right answers to the questions, having worked out what the opposite of what he said is, if you can do so. I don't think they knew the answers anyway. However, it's a very hard challenge, and even if you do know the answers, it's tough to get to grips with. Here we are at the block and tackle, and this is really the first time I realised, oh, they're being killed off early here. Obviously the spell Sprint would have been for Ariadne, but let's get her out of the way quickly by squashing her with the block there. Vicky doesn't fall through the floor like the other teams that die on this challenge. She gets squashed by a block when she's standing there, because they want her out of the way. A magic room team and magic may help you get through it, says Traegard. I never believed that. Only indirectly would magic have helped them. They'd have been allowed to get through if they could cope with the challenge and use that spell sprint to get away from Ariadne, exactly as Alistair did with the run spell. It wasn't the opposition that confused you, merely the opposites. Yes, the opposites did confuse her. But yeah, regardless, they didn't know the answers. And I will go through those answers in just a second, but I mustn't forget to say, those doors in the block and tackle I quite recently noticed. They are Granitas and Olgarth's bricked up door, sampled, copied, and unbricked up. Which is quite interesting. An aspect of an original room from the very first episode, appearing several times in Series 4, and indeed, that room will appear once in Series 5, and I'll be talking about the scene in which it does appear in the fairly near future. What Merlin asks Vicky there is, who was the daughter of Uther Pendragon. Pickle tries to help them, reverse the idea of the question. They can quite easily say the son, who was the son, but they don't know it was King Arthur. Vicky almost gets to grips with what happened to Cinderella's coach at midday. It did not turn into a pumpkin. You can see John Woodnut kind of open his mouth to maybe want to say something encouraging. Oh, you're nearly there, but nothing comes out. What happened to Cinderella's coach at midnight? It did turn back into a pumpkin, so they were nearly there with that, but it appeared wasn't good enough, and they have no idea that Julius Caesar did have to worry about the Ides of March. I wonder how many correct they would have needed to get the spell sprint for realsies. Just 1, 2, perhaps, probably. But it was a lot to ask of them to unravel all that trick and to know the answers, and yeah, as it turned out, they couldn't do either. So they definitely want Vicky's team out of the way there, don't they, to make way for the winning team of the series, Dickon, Dominic, Tim and Praveen. They certainly don't have the hardest quest of the series. Here we are at the place of choice, and when I said on my first Series 2 commentary, it becomes very much common practice to pick your own quest object. This is the place that makes that so, being so familiar with Series 4. It seems right to me to see the place of choice, picking between 2 of the quest objects at the very beginning. That's the way to start a Knightmare quest as far as I'm concerned. And I do think it's a nice little starter challenge. Much better use of the spinning wheel there than the Spin Dizzy in Series 3. Of course, the fact that the walkway paths are on the same level with the wheel, and you don't have to jump off, is a big help. Makes it much less awkward for the advisors, the dungeoneer, and the watchers. So that can only be a good thing. Now, Dickon is a wonderful dungeoneer. There can be no denying he does some excellent interactions with the characters, with no hint of sarcasm or impatience, which is nice. Always polite and makes some very good scenes, with the likes of Melisandre, Motley, Brother Mace, Audris. Good stuff. I don't think this team are really as good as they appear to be, though. Or as I always thought they were, and my family always thought they were back in 1990. They seem like they know what they're doing, and they know what they're talking about. And indeed, 9 out of 9 correct door monster questions cannot be denied. Tim in the middle particularly always seems like he knows what he's talking about, but actually he talks a lot of nonsense. One thing he says that is true is here, in this Doris scene. Ganders are goose and swans are pens and cobs, but he's not always as on the ball as that. And if we're talking about coasts and the team not really having to do very much, and Tragar doing any thinking for them that they do need to do, well, think, team. If she doesn't know the answer, how can she know whether you do or not? This quest is easy. There's certainly nothing as hard as Merlin and his opposite questions. There's not even the block and tackle in this one. I think Tim Child and friends know that we need to get a winner for the first time in 2 years. The last time was Julian in Series 2, Episode 13. Dickens' team win in Series 4, Episode 13. And while it may not be exactly a foregone conclusion, they are very much helped along the way. And the big one is, not only do they not have to answer opposite questions to get something to deal with Ariadne, they also don't have to get anything to deal with Ariadne. Gundrada's there. Ariadne decides that Gundrada makes a better dinner than Dickon does. So Ariadne chases Gundrada off, leaving Dickon free to escape pretty much at his leisure. Now I'm picking this as the second worst, sticking out like a sore thumb bit of fixing that is very unsatisfying to watch when you first watch the show. Coming second only to, of course, the rightly infamous shortcut in Series 8. And I'll be talking later on in my series of commentaries about how the shortcut always stuck in my craw and still does as a viewer. But Dickens' free ticket through Ariadne's lair, a very definite and deserving runner-up. If you stop and think about it, it's not at all fair, the level of testing for your means of dealing with Ariadne. Vicky's team there, as we know, had a particularly hard challenge and failed it. Giles doesn't really have to do anything to get his Joker card. And you've got varying levels along the way. But actually having Dickon on screen doing nothing about Ariadne and still getting through, that makes it too obvious to the watchers in that first viewing experience that, yeah, that's a bit of a cheat and a bit of a fix, which is not so satisfying to watch. Thanks for joining me for this commentary. Join me again next time as I talk about Knightmare Series 5, Episode 3.